So you're listening to Ian Dale at Drive. We've got Emily Thornberry, Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary, in the studio with us for the next 30, 40 minutes or so. So it's your chance to put your questions to the woman who could be Foreign Secretary in the next Labour government. 0345 6060 973. No subjects off limits, I think I'm right in saying, aren't I, Emily? You look...
Sure. Shrug
of the shoulders there. You could have seen that shrug if you're watching us on Facebook Live. And you can also watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or on Twitter. But we want your calls, 0345 6060 973. Before we come to the first one, though, we've just been talking about the immigration figures out today. Do you think the slight fall in immigration is a good thing? And what about the numbers coming from the EU?
I'm worried about there being such a shortage of nurses and people in social care. And the fact is, I think that the number of nurses from Europe applying to join the NHS has gone down by 97%. And that, I think, shows that people are uncertain as to what their future within Britain is likely to be, because Theresa May's not been clear about it.
Isn't it also partly due to the new language tests?
It may be partly to do with the new language test, but it isn't an answer to the 97%, is it? And 97% fall is pretty bad when we've got so many vacancies in the NHS and in social care.
But there's still net migration of 90,000 from the EU, so I think it's 250,000 more EU nationals here than there were at the time of the referendum. Isn't it a bit of a danger to sort of exaggerate the so-called Brexodus, because it's not actually taking place, is it?
Well, I'm talking about the NHS, and I think that's pretty important. And we also can see that there are crops rotting in the fields because they've not been able to get enough people to be able to pick the crops. So there are definitely areas where we're not getting EU migration in the way that we used to. And I don't think it necessarily does our country any good.
Just a bit of breaking news. The Save the Children Chief Executive, or the ex-Save the Children Chief Executive, Justin Forsyth, has resigned from UNICEF after allegations that were made against him. We'll bring you more on that a bit later. Let's go to your calls. Tony is in Fareham. Hello, Tony.
Yes, good afternoon, Ian. Good afternoon, madam. My question to Emily is, how would, as Foreign Secretary, she handle Russia's foreign policy in Syria, particularly Mr. Putin?
Nice, easy one to start with.
The tragedy with Syria is that after the Arab Spring, there was an uprising in Syria against Assad, and then everybody piled in. It's you've got the countries from the surrounding area that are now funding and assisting various forces within Syria, and we seem to be having a series of proxy wars going on. So, for example, as you know, there's a developing Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they both have proxy fighters fighting it out in Syria. We're a very long way away from the initial challenge to Assad, which was that people didn't want him to be their leader and they wanted to have an alternative.
But how would you deal with Putin? That's the question.
So I think what you have to do is you have to pull out all of the foreign forces and everyone who is trying to influence Syria and allow the Syrian people to come to a political solution to this. Now, at the moment, we've got it would seem, peace talks going on, but we've got two rival peace talks. So we've got the UN one and we've got the Russian one. My view is whichever one works is the one that we go with, because in the end, everything that we do has to be in furtherance of peace in Syria.
But we know that Putin is essentially on the side of Assad. Can the Russians really be an honest broker in this?
Who is an honest broker in this? Because everyone is involved. We have been involved. The Americans are involved. We've got UAE. We've got Saudi Arabia. We've got Iran. We've got Israel. We've got everyone within the surrounding area all has a piece of the pie here, and that's the problem.
But there are some that are more trustworthy brokers than others, surely.
Well, in the end, I would have thought that the United Nations would be the most appropriate way of dealing with this. But if the Russian-sponsored talks have traction, then in the end, I'm a pragmatist, and I just want peace in the area.
But you said that everyone should pull out. You mean including the Americans, ourselves, the French, and the Russians?
And UAE and Saudi Arabia and Iran. I mean, they all have.
How would you bring that about?
Well, what you have to do is you have to find a political solution, and you have to stop the fighting. There has to be a ceasefire, a proper ceasefire, and we have to stop all these. And Turkey, is obviously another country which is getting involved in Syria, and it's a mess. And there is no military solution to this. There can only be a political solution. And we cannot allow these countries to continue to fight out their proxy wars in Syria.
But Russia says it will consider supporting the UN proposed ceasefire in Syria if it doesn't cover Daesh and Al-Qaeda linked groups. That seems to be somewhat unreasonable, doesn't it?
Well, you may remember that the British Parliament gave the British government allowed them to be involved in bombing of Daesh, and that continues to be our policy. The Labour Party didn't vote for this, but that's what the policy is. There's not much fighting going on anymore from Daesh, and yet the British still have an involvement in Syria. We don't actually have a mandate given to them by the British Parliament at the moment.
All British involvement now should stop in Syria?
I think that there is a mandate in relation to Daesh, but I think that what our involvement in Syria ought to be is actually we ought to be involved in ensuring that the peace talks go on, because there's not a military solution. And the people of Syria have been suffering so much for so long. There is no other answer, and it's not terribly glamorous, and it will take a long time, and it will be frustrating, but you have to talk.
Let's take another call on this from Ahmed, who's in Uxbridge. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Thanks for having me. Following up from the United Nations conversation, Russia has vetoed 11 UN resolutions against Bashar al-Assad. And we as Syrians feel that actually the West is happy that Russia is vetoing, so that the West can stay outside the game and do nothing. Is there really nothing the UK can do to Syria outside the UN, since this way is obviously closed?
I'm not quite sure, Ahmed, what it is that you're asking for us to do, because, I am strongly of the view that you cannot just decide to bomb a country from 30,000 feet and think that you will get a Western-style democracy coming out of it at the end. I think that things are much more complex than that, and I think that far too often we have been lulled into believing that somehow or other that will work.
With respect, that wasn't why we were bombing in Syria, was it? We were bombing Assad because he used chemical weapons. That's why the bombers went in.
No,
it wasn't to create a democracy.
No, we were bombing Daesh. So we weren't supposed to be involved in relation to Assad. It was quite a distinct thing that was
up to a point.
No, not up to a point. That's what the mandate is. That was what Parliament agreed. So Parliament agreed that the British should be involved in terms of fighting Daesh, but not in terms of being involved with Assad. You'll see that the Americans were involved in bombing Assad because of the use of chemical weapons, but the British didn't.
Do you not regret your vote in 2013 against military action in Syria? Because if we had taken action, then maybe some of these things wouldn't be happening.
I don't believe that's right. I just don't believe that's right. I believe that
So no regrets at all?
No. I regret that the war is...
A lot of Labour MPs do have regrets on that vote.
They do. I'm not one of them. I think that in the end, we have seen the way that it has played out. We have seen that it was alleged to begin with that there was some form of united opposition to Assad. It wasn't a united opposition to Assad. Sometimes, you see a regime and you profoundly disagree with it. And so it's too easy a leap to believe that those that are against the regime are in some way united and believe in things that you agree with.
When you see the awful images of people on the TV screen, certainly as a result of some of the chemical attacks, but even in Eastern Ghouta at the moment, especially of the children, don't you feel guilty? Don't you feel ashamed that Britain hasn't been able to do enough to help them?
We all want the same thing. I don't want children to be blown up. I don't want people to be bombed. I want there to be peace in Syria. We all want the same thing. It's a question of how do you go about achieving that? And I do not believe that any more British bombs are going to save those children.
Gavin Williamson, the new Defence Secretary, who I'm sure you're a big fan of, he says that Russia is a bigger threat to our security than terrorists. Do you agree with him?
There are threats from Russia, which I think are new threats, and I think you have to look at the 21st century threats in particular that Russia poses. I think that Russia is prepared to use any weakness. I think that in the end, I think that Putin is not happy with the status quo at the moment and is an opportunist. So I think that's why it's important that we retain our commitment to NATO and that we remain united on NATO. I think that they will take any opportunity. I think that they are. I said, you may remember this, Ian. 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I was saying the biggest threat from Russia was cyber attack, and people said that I was deluded, that I was paranoid, that I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, here we are. I did. And I think those are the new...
So you do kind of agree with them?
So I think there are new types of threats, and I think they are serious. I think that, a cyber attack on our infrastructure in Britain, if that was to happen, could be catastrophic. Of course it could be catastrophic, and we have to make sure that we properly defend ourselves.
If Putin came on a visit to this country, would you shake his hand?
If I was... I would want to talk to Putin. Of course I would want to talk to Putin if I was given an opportunity to.
And shake his hand? What do you make of our new Defence Secretary?
Well, I think that he's very inexperienced. He's trying to make a mark. I think that some of the things that he says are ill-judged.
But so would you be inexperienced, wouldn't you, as Foreign Secretary?
Well, I've been doing this job of shadowing the Foreign Secretary for a year or so now, and I work at it quite hard. And I hope that I would come with an understanding of world situation, which may have a bit more depth than others. But Gavin Williamson is not had a ministerial office before, and so has gone into being a Secretary of State, and has come out of the traps pretty fast, and has been saying some pretty strong things. And some of them, I think, have come as a surprise to the Ministry of Defence, if I can put it that way.
Very, very diplomatically put, if I may say so. David's in Norwich. David, what would you like to ask Emily?
Good evening, Ian. Before I start, can I just first of all just say you became a national hero last night defending our animals in Hull slaughterhouses. You were absolutely brilliant. Well done. Madam Thornberry, good evening to you. What is your view on British jihadists in Syria? What should happen to them?
I'm going to call you Madam from now on. Go on.
I think that they should stand trial. I think that if people have...
But where?
Well, I think they should either stand trial in Britain or they should stand trial in an international criminal court. But either way, they should stand trial. That's what should happen to them. If they've committed crimes, they should stand trial.
So you don't have a problem with them coming back to the UK, because Gavin Williamson certainly does, Amber Rudd seemed to. What's your preference for where they should be tried?
I have a belief in the rule of law. I don't think, as Gavin Williamson seems to think, that they should all be killed. I just think that it's contrary to everything that we believe in as a nation. I don't think that you should be capturing people on the battlefield and killing them. I think that if people have been captured, they should be tried, they should be held to account for their crimes, and they should be punished as a result. But I certainly don't think that it's appropriate for the British government to be saying that British citizens caught abroad should be killed. I just don't think that's right.
Sam is in Leeds. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Emily. My question is, with all this Oxfam and the devastation that's going on there, how could these people even think about sex and such things? If they're that bothered, give these poor women the money. But in the aftermath of all this, of Oxfam, including other charities, we just haven't heard about them yet, how are they going to redeem themselves with the British public and other people? How are they going to pull this back? Because it's abhorrent what's been going on.
It is, Sam. It's abhorrent what's been going on. And the idea of these men taking advantage of people in acute distress and taking advantage of women and children is appalling. I think, though, having said that, the vast majority of people who work in these organisations do it because they believe they have a calling, and they go to corners of the world that are desperate, and I wouldn't want to go there, and they're dangerous, and they're miserable, but people do it because they think that it's the right thing to do, and they do their best to help. My brother worked for a number of charities, and he spent a lot of his time in sub-Saharan Africa, and the stories that he tells about what was happening in Rwanda and DRC, and I mean it was terrible. And I'm really proud of the work that he's done, and he's a better person than I am for doing it.
But you must have asked him if he saw any of this kind of activity happening where he was, because it does seem, I mean, I don't believe that it just happened in Haiti. We've got lots of other examples of where this sort of thing has happened. I don't know if you've heard Andrew MacLeod, who runs for what's it called? Hear Those Who Cry, Hear Their Cries. He reckons that UN soldiers have carried out 60,000 rapes in the last 10 years. And this is something that I don't think any of us would have countenanced before hearing about this scandal. Have you heard other examples?
I've certainly heard about UN peacekeepers, and there have been allegations about UN peacekeepers and rapes. I think one of the ways in which that can be countered actually is by making a positive attempt to get the UN peacekeepers in a much more mixed force. I think if you have more women involved, I think the culture tends to change. What tends to happen with UN peacekeepers is that the West tends to pay for them and the developing world provides the troops. I think we need to think again about the composition of peacekeepers, but I think that, working on having more women involved in peacekeeping would change the way in which this was approached.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, the ex-Save the Children chief executive, Justin Forsyth, has resigned from UNICEF, saying he doesn't want to damage charities. I don't know if you know him. He worked for Gordon Brown for quite some time in Number 10. What's your reaction to that?
I didn't know him. Well, I think it's the right thing for him to have done. I think these organisations are so important, and they're certainly much more important than any individuals. And what we need to be able to do is to have proper inquiries into what has happened, to get to the bottom of it. But, our country would not be better, would be much worse if we lost outstanding charities such as Oxfam and Save the Children, who have done outstanding work and work that we should be proud of. And as I say, the vast majority of people who are involved in this work are selfless, are hardworking, are committed, are good people, and they do the right thing by way of the world.
If you were Foreign Secretary, would you seek to bring DFID back under the umbrella of the Foreign Office so you would have more control over foreign aid, especially in the light of this scandal?
No, I think that the Department for International Development ought to be a standalone department. I think that it should not have anything to do with foreign policy or indeed with trade. I think that international development should be a standalone issue, and it should be being done because it's the right thing to do.
Do you think one of the unfortunate corollaries of what's happened with Oxfam is that it's given those who oppose the 0.7% GDP target a bit of ammunition? They're saying, well, look, we can see what goes on now where this money is spent. We should spend it at home. Charity begins at home. Are you worried about that?
Yeah, I mean, that argument worries me, but I think that the honest answer to that is not to take the other extreme and not to be so defensive of these organisations and not to acknowledge that there hasn't been wrongdoing, because clearly there has, and clearly we need to look at it. But we do have to look at it in a balanced way, and as I say, we do need to identify the fact that it is a minority of people who take advantage of the desperate circumstances in which they find those who they're supposed to be looking after.
0345 6060973 is the number to call if you'd like to ask Emily Thornberry, Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary, a question. You can watch us on Facebook Live, on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, and Twitter. Let's go to Martin, who's in Epsom. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Emily. I have a lot of respect for you as a politician, so just from the get-go. But what
that wasn't even a but there. That's good, isn't it?
Just keep talking, Martin. Don't let him put you off.
But what exactly is the difference between the Labour and the Conservative Brexit policy? Because it seems to me that you couldn't fit a cigarette paper between the two. And when are you going to ask about the Labour members, which the party says it cares so much about, what they think, considering they voted 65% Remain?
There is a difference between Labour and Tory party policy on Brexit, because the Labour Party has a policy on Brexit and the Tories don't seem to. You've got what do they call it, a war cabinet going on now or tomorrow. It's going to go on for 8 hours, and we've had 21 months since the referendum, and they still don't even know the basics of what it is that they want. So they don't know whether they. So we don't have anything. All we have is the most extraordinary platitudes and continuing to kind of just trying to kind of put the issue off and put the issue off. Well, they can't put it off any longer. There is going to have to be. We are going to have to be a bit clearer about what it is that we need to be achieving by way of these negotiations.
What are the differences, though? Because you say, well, we recognise the need to respect the vote from June 2016. We're coming out of the single market and we're coming out of the customs union. That's the same as Tory policy.
Okay. So what we have said from the absolute outset is that we accept the result of the referendum, but we need to look after the economy. And that's where we start. We did not start as Theresa May started, which was by putting down a whole lot of red lines that were nonsense. So, so she turns up at Tory party conference, this was 18 months ago, and she starts saying, we're going to leave the European Court of Justice, we're going to take back control of immigration, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And essentially setting out her position in such a way that there was nothing to negotiate with Europe. We might as well just have walked out and slammed the door.
But if we're leaving the EU, we have to come out of the European jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, don't we?
Okay, so if we're leaving the European Union, then we, as we are going to, then we have to then be involved in negotiations about what our ongoing relationship with Europe is going to be. And the first question will be, do we want to be in any form of customs union? We've said that we cannot see how anything else is going to work. We cannot see how you will have anything other than a hard border in Ireland if we're not in a customs union.
We're told that Labour's position on the customs union has been evolving and deepening. Can you tell us how that works?
So I'm trying to. So what I'm trying to say is we begin with, we look after the economy. We are pragmatists. We leave the European Union, but we make sure that we look after the economy more than anything else. It's all about jobs. And any government worth its stripes of any sort throughout the centuries, of whichever country, has always said that until this Tory one, who seems to be more interested in straight bananas than they are in terms of looking after the economy. So we begin with that. And we say we leave, but we look after the economy. How do we do that? Is there any way in which we can have frictionless trade with Europe, without tariffs, without great lorry parks at Dover, without being in a form of customs union? Can't think of anything else. Seriously can't think of anything else. So of course we will need to be in a form of customs union.
What kind of form of customs union?
So we will. So technically, because we're leaving the European Union, we can't be in the customs union that we're in now. So we leave, and then we have to negotiate a new agreement. That, we think, is likely to be a customs union that will look pretty much like the current customs union.
So that would preclude a British government outside the EU from negotiating its own trade agreements? That's
if we were,
crucial, isn't it?
if we were to say if we were during these negotiations to say to the European Union, if you want to negotiate with third parties, with third countries, we could be connected to that agreement, and it will be to the advantage of Europe that you have a great big economy like Britain as part of your negotiations. But we will need to be part of forming those relationships and forming those rules in order for you to take advantage of the fact that you're negotiating on behalf of Europe and you're negotiating with us too. So that's how it would work. So
it's basically the same as now?
No, it's not the same as now because at the moment the European Union negotiates deals with the third parties. We would need to play a part in forming those rules.
But we already do, in the sense that we feed into the negotiations via Brussels.
No. It would need to be, because we wouldn't have the same relationship with Brussels. There would need to be a bit more of arm's length relationship, and we would need to make sure that any deal that was done with third countries would be in our interest and not contrary to our interests.
Barry Gardner, your international trade spokesman, said in July a customs union agreement with the EU would be a disaster and leave us as a vassal state. He can't accept this customs union policy, surely.
Well, as I say, we've been talking about this, and I think that there is. I mean, Barry agrees that we need to be in a customs union after we leave the European Union. So, I think that.
So just to be clear, we would not be able to negotiate our own trade agreements with other countries without the say-so of the EU under this new thinking?
No. I wouldn't put it that way. I would put it this way. I would say that we would take advantage of being in a partnership with the European Union in order to be able to, for example, negotiate with China. And China wouldn't just be negotiating with Britain, it would be Britain and the European Union.
Why would they agree to that, though? Why would the EU agree to that?
Because of what I said earlier, which is that the European Union would have the advantage of not only negotiating on their behalf, but they would have the additional clout of being able to work in partnership with us.
But that's what they do at the moment. So they would say, well, you're leaving. Why should we agree to do this? This gives you it's a cake and eat it scenario, isn't it?
No.
You sound as if you want your cake and eat it.
What I'm saying is that it would be in the interest of the European Union, when negotiating with a country like China, to be able to negotiate on behalf of the European Union and do it in partnership with Britain, because we bring the additional clout of our large economy, and we would have to, as a quid pro quo, be involved in forming those relationships and making sure that those rules were in accordance with British interests.
Well, I think you said something very new there, which I think a lot of people will be interested in. Jake is in Leeds. Jake, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Good evening, Emily. I'm afraid I'm going to have to press you on this point slightly more because you mentioned in response to the previous caller you have a policy on this and the Tories don't. Now, I, like a lot of other Labour supporters who would like you to be in government, simply don't understand your position. And the Tories have said they're going to be out of the single market, out of the customs union, and your front bench has at least 3 different positions. So I don't quite understand how they don't have a position and you do.
Well, I don't know what I can say. I mean, I've explained what our position is, and then people say they don't understand it and that we're saying different things. We're saying this. So we're saying this in relation to the customs union, and then in relation to the single market, we're saying we need to leave the single market, but what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to retain the benefits of the single market, which means that we need to be able to be close to the single market. Obviously, we need to be reassured in those negotiations that European competition policy won't undermine our ability to be able to deliver our manifesto, for example. And we also are quite honest about acknowledging that part of the debate during the EU referendum was about immigration, and we need to be able to have fair rules and manage migration. So we need to be able to change our immigration laws to the benefit of our country and our communities, so and our economy. So that's our position. That's our position.
Okay. Well, forgive me, but I've repeatedly heard yourself and Dawn Butler and other Labour MPs saying that they've been asked, will you rule out membership of the single market and the customs union? And certain members of your party have said they won't rule it out and they'll keep it on the table. Now, given that you've just said you want to control immigration, that would mean you'd have to rule out leaving the single market, yet many Labour MPs are not ruling that out. So how does that work?
When I speak to Labour MPs, and I speak to them in the way in which I have yet to come across one who disagrees with me. I think that sometimes what happens is that people get fixated on the forms. So they talk about, will you be in the customs union? Will you be in the single market? Actually, a better way of looking at it is to say, what is it that we want to achieve? And when you talk about what it is that we want to achieve, what Labour wants to achieve is something we all agree on. So, it's just a question of, and sometimes, as I say, you try and crowbar that into, does that mean single market continued membership? Or does that mean, or to how far away from the single market will you be? Or we can say it because we're not even doing, we're not doing the negotiations.
No, but you want to retain as many benefits from the single market as possible, just as the Conservatives do. There is no real difference there. You accept that freedom of movement has got to end. So do they. So you want to negotiate as good a trade deal as you can. There isn't much difference there, is there? But how do you think these negotiations are going? You've met Michel Barnier.
Well, hang on. You also, can I just also say, all right, there's another thing, because we were also talking about the European Court of Justice, and Theresa May has said from the outset that she doesn't want to have anything to do with the European Court of Justice. Now, it does seem to me that if you have any sort of agreement with anyone, you have to be able to have somebody to arbitrate. Now, if she doesn't want
why
to be...
Why should it be their court rather than ours? Or couldn't there be some new joint court?
Yeah, well, let me get that. So you need to have a form of arbitration, and Theresa May has said that she won't have anything to do with the European Court of Justice, that everybody's got to go to the Royal Courts of Justice on the Strand. Clearly nonsense. It's
Why?
Either... Well,
Why?
Because you can't...
You're a lawyer. Why can't you stand up for your own legal system?
Because it has to be an arbitration that both sides are happy with.
We'll have 3 judges from Europe and 3 judges from the Supreme Court.
So if you'd let me finish my sentence, what I would suggest is that what we need to have is we need to think about how we ensure that it will probably be some form of hybrid. I would suggest, though, this is subject to negotiation, but we would need to have some way in which you could have British lawyers, British judges involved along with Europeans. But this is why throughout we have said we should not be sweeping things off the table. We should be being clear that when we go into negotiations with our friends from Europe, we say to them, We've got a problem, we're leaving. You've got a problem, we're leaving. Let's sort something out together. We don't spend our time insulting them, shouting at them, saying, this is outrageous, all this. We would have an entirely different approach, and we would be prepared to negotiate.
I think your arbitration approach is actually very similar to David Davis's, so maybe you have more in common than you think.
Well, it's a long way away from what Theresa May says. That's my point.
All right.
My point is, it depends what day of the week it is and which Tory you're talking to, what it is that they say.
We've got to go to the news headlines. Are you okay to stay on for a bit longer? I think we've got lots of people that want to talk to you. So that's Emily Thornberry here for at least another 10 or 15 minutes. 0345 6060 973. Let's get the latest news headlines at 5:34 from Thomas Watts.
The Shadow Home Secretary Emily Thornberry has told Ian there can be no military solution in Syria and British involvement must focus on effective peace talks. The bombardment of rebel-held eastern Ghouta has continued for a fifth day. In the last half hour, a UNICEF executive has resigned over allegations were made of inappropriate behaviour while he worked for Save the Children. Justin Forsyth stepped down as a deputy executive director of UNICEF after previously admitting making some personal mistakes. The Met Police says it's treating the investigation into a package delivered to St James's Palace on Monday as a racist hate crime. The parcel reportedly contained white powder and was addressed to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. LBC weather, patchy rain clearing to leave a dry night with clear spells, a hard frost everywhere by the morning, a low of -1.
LBC Travel, looking first at what's happening in Hendon in North London. The A1 is closed southbound between Five Ways Corner and Tenterton Drive. There's been a serious accident and there are delays on the nearby Watford Way and North Circular as a result. The southbound exit slip road of the M1 at Junction 1 is also closed. On the North Circular in Edmonton, there's a lane closed eastbound at 4th Street because a van has broken down. And in Shepherd's Bush, the Uxbridge Road, I'm just hearing, is closed by Shepherd's Bush Market Station because of an accident. There are some queues on the approach there. On the tubes, there's no service on the District Line between Earls Court and Turnham Green because of a signal failure. LBC Travel, I'm Ross Powell.
This is LBC.
PlusNet people can't help but help. Take Dave here. He's a cheery chap. He's helping Mrs H switch to a super-fast fibre package.
You're very welcome, Mrs Henderson.
Maggie, she's setting up someone online with a SIM-only mobile plan. And Chris...
I find drying my hair upside down adds extra volume.
Well, he seems to be handing out good advice too. At PlusNet, people will go out of their way to help you. It's probably why their customers voted that they're more satisfied than those of Sky, Virgin and TalkTalk. PlusNet will do you proud.
High quality, affordable kitchens designed in your own home. That's Room Sense.
That's Room Sense.
Book your free Room Sense home design visit and we'll measure up, show you samples, create a stunning kitchen design and give you a quote all before we leave.
Quality at a price you can afford. That's Room Sense.
Book today at roomsense.co.uk.
Do you have a pension? Maybe you've got more than one. How do you know if they're in the right pension funds, making as much money as possible for your retirement? Answer is, you probably don't. At The Pension Works, our fully qualified independent financial advisors could add instant value to your retirement fund. Simply text the word YES to 83222 for your free Pension Works health check. That's YES to 83222 today. Your pensions, working harder with The Pension Works.
It's here. It's one of over 1,000 great used vans, and it could be yours.
What's that coming over the hill? Van Monster. Van Monster.
Van Monster has a huge choice of used vans across the UK, all with 6 months warranty and flexible finance options too. Like these 2014 Peugeot Partners from under £4,500 plus 20% VAT. Find your next van right now at vanmonster.com. Representative 13.9% APR.
Oh, brilliant from Pogba.
Oh, Dele Alli on Dybala. Hazard skips past Messi.
Here's Aguero. Good drive.
Oh, Salah!
With BT Sport, you'll see all 5 English teams still in the UEFA Champions League. It's free for 18 months with BT Infinity, now $24.99 a month. Search BT Broadband before the 22nd of February. Be there, BT Sport.
With BT Sport on Sky, $9.99 setup, 18-month contract, then $44.99 a month. Prices may change. New customers 30 gigabytes usage. Direct debit terms apply.
Ian Dale at Drive on LBC.
5:38 here on LBC. Quick business update with Ben Kumar at Seven Investment Management. Ben, Centrica, they're cutting 2,000 jobs.
They are. So Centrica own British Gas. This is basically because lots of people have been switching gas and electricity supplier. British Gas lost 750,000 customers last year as people decided to move away. Centrica saying, well, you know what? We need to cut costs in response.
And the UK GDP growth has been revised down slightly for 2017.
Yep, nothing too drastic, down to 1.7% from 1.8%. We won't get a full read for about another 12 months, but it's a suggestion that we're now in the same league as Italy and Japan when it comes to GDP growth, rather than people like the US and the rest of Europe.
And the markets today?
FTSE down 0.4% at 7252. Pound weaker against the dollar at 139.5 and weaker against the euro at 113.
Thank you very much. That's Ben Kumar at Seven Investment Management.
LBC Business Update.
With Sage Business Cloud, helping you manage everything from money to people.
5:39. Emily Thornberry is with us, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary, taking your calls. Still time to call in, 0345 6060 973. Camille is in Hemel Hempstead. What would you like to ask, Camille?
Hi, Ian, and also hi, Emily. I'd just like to know, what would you do to ensure that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is rightfully released from the Iranian prison, something Boris Johnson has thus far woefully failed to do?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't go into Parliament and say that she was there in order to train journalists when that simply wasn't true, exactly. And make the situation much worse. I would know my brief, and when asked by the Select Committee, I would explain that she was a woman who had parents there and she had a new child and was taking her new child to see her parents, and that she was not working at all. And to say anything else was to completely undermine her case. And Boris then went and spoke to the foreign minister, and the foreign minister said, "Oh, don't worry, Boris, everything's fine, everything's fine." Everything is not fine.
So do you blame him for failing to bring her home?
I blame him for making her situation much worse. I'm not pretending that it isn't a very difficult situation, and Iran is a highly complicated country. The difficulty, in a way, with Iran is that there are different factions running different parts of Iran. So there's the theocracy, the supreme leader who runs the courts and internal security, and they have a great influence, obviously, on what happens to Nazanin. And then there is a more, at least in the Iranian context, a more liberal wing who are in charge of the economy, foreign affairs, things like that. And they're the ones who were responsible for the Iranian nuclear deal, and that which is a very important international deal where Iran says that it won't develop nuclear weapons for 20 years in exchange for us getting rid of sanctions, which is what the President of the United States is trying to undermine.
Have you talked to the Iranians at all about this?
No, I've not.
Because I was reading one of the papers this morning that it seems to be that they say we owe them a lot of money, hundreds of millions of pounds, which we needn't go into all the details of that. But that's what's holding it up.
Yeah, so it's a simple thing. They were going to buy some arms off of us. They gave us the money. There was then the revolution. We held on to the money.
So do you feel that she's being used as a political pawn now?
I wouldn't want to say anything that would undermine her case.
OK. Let's go to Liz, who's in Greenwich. Hello, Liz.
Oh, hello. Yeah. Hello, Emily. I kind of following on a bit from that. It just makes me feel really unsafe with Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, because he doesn't kind of seem to grasp and sort of judge everything correctly. Do you think that I'm wrong to feel like that, or would you agree with me?
Do you feel safe with Boris as our Foreign Secretary?
I think there's lots of things wrapped up in one on this. I think that we are so preoccupied with Brexit that it seems to be the excuse for us not taking the role that we ought to have in the world seriously. We have a place on the Security Council. We hold the pen on Yemen. We hold the pen on the Rohingya. We are supposed to take a lead on those things.
But what about Boris?
And we are abdicating that responsibility. And we seem to be a country that people don't take seriously anymore. And quite often they laugh. And they laugh because of the things that Boris says sometimes. I think that's... I'm ashamed of that.
So it's not that we're unsafe, it's that we're a laughingstock. That's what you're saying.
I think that we are losing our clout in the world, and there are a number of factors. And some of the things that Boris says and doesn't help.
You've been quite diplomatic I thought that was a bit of an open goal for you there, but you haven't kicked the ball in the net.
I hope to be Foreign Secretary soon.
Just one more on Boris. He's facing new questions over his judgment because the Foreign Office rejected a request from the government's head of ethics to charge for the launch of a Brexit-supporting think tank, the so-called Institute of Free Trade. He overruled them, and that's lost the taxpayer £6,000, apparently.
He was asked questions about this at Foreign Office Questions, and one of the most important questions he was asked was, what did you discuss? I mean, here is this think tank. They had this event at the Foreign Office. What was discussed? We don't necessarily want to know what you drank or what canapes you had, but what were you actually discussing? What was the purpose of that? I presume that this wasn't a jolly on taxpayers' expense, but he didn't give us a proper answer to that. This is why there are rules about outside organisations using public buildings and why they ought to pay rent. Because clearly, if it would be wrong, wouldn't it? And it's for that reason that we have these laws.
You obviously want to be Foreign Secretary, but you seem to be enjoying things most when you're actually standing in for Jeremy Corbyn at Prime Minister's questions. It's almost more entertaining than watching Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May when you're up against somebody else. In the longer term, would you fancy that job?
I really want to be Foreign Secretary, and I think I could make a huge difference. I think I could make a difference to our standing in the world. I would take it seriously. I would get to know my brief properly, and I hope that I would be a credit to my country.
First Labour woman leader, first Labour woman Prime Minister. That's got to appeal, though, at some point in the future. There's nothing wrong with having ambition, is there?
I want Jeremy Corbyn to be the next Prime Minister, and I want to be Foreign Secretary.
Is Labour still on standby for a snap election?
Yeah.
Bring it on.
It could happen at any time. At any time, we have no idea when they're going to fall over. Every week I say to myself, surely they can't last another week. What a shambles. And they do. And they stagger on another week.
Is that frustrating for you?
It's very frustrating. There is nothing worse in a way than being in opposition, because you want to be able to make a difference. You want to be able to make our country better. And you see this lot in office and they are just not doing anything. If anything, they're making matters worse. They're not doing anything domestically. They're just having one review after another. There are so many things that need to be done. And internationally, they're undermining our country.
Is Labour ready to sweep the board at the local elections in May?
We're going to be out there. We're going to fight for every single council seat, and hopefully we shall get some really good results.
And what does success look like for you?
A Labour government is what success looks like.
But in May?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to look at the whole of the country, but in London, there are certainly some councils that we would hope to be able to win.
Westminster, Wandsworth, those Tory councils that were so iconic.
Well, it would be extraordinary to win iconic
you think
Tory
you're in
councils.
with a chance?
We're going for it, and we shall see.
Let's go to Tasha, who's in Hertford. Hello, Tasha.
Hello. I wanted to ask, as somebody who's experienced quite a lot of sexual harassment in the past, and there's been claims of it happening in Parliament, is Parliament going to take this seriously? And if so, when and how?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an enormously important issue in Parliament and indeed in the rest of society. And I think that it can be worse in Parliament because I think that on the whole, those people who are in positions of power in Parliament tend to be older men. And there are young, vulnerable men and women who can be exploited at times.
Have you experienced it at all?
Yeah, of course.
In Parliament?
Yeah, of course.
In what way?
Well, I mean, I've been hassled, both in Parliament and then when I was also a barrister before that. If that has been,
But I mean, you're sort of kind of shrugging it off, but it's actually really important, isn't it, for somebody in your position to be open about these things and say, yeah, it's happened to me, because it then gives license to others to have the confidence to maybe take it up with people that have done it to them.
Yeah, I know, I understand. But the counter-argument, in a way, and it's something which I tussle with myself. I'm not sure kind of what the right approach is, because yes, I've been subjected to this stuff, and just like I'm subjected to abuse online and so on. But I really don't want people to think of me as a victim, because I don't feel of myself as a victim. I feel that.
But if you have been harassed, you are a victim.
Well, Yes, but I'm also a member of Parliament, and I also do the best job in the world, and I don't want people to be put off, particularly women, to be put off from this brilliant job, and I don't want them to think I wouldn't dare do it, because I want people to look at and go, well, if Emily Thornberry can do it, I can do it too, because they can.
Under these new guidelines from Andrea Leadsom, should the anonymity of those accused of harassment be preserved until they're found guilty?
There's a bit of a problem with this, because quite often any harassment that's going on will be happening in an MP's office, and so if the name of the victim, if the name of the perpetrator of this harassment came out, then people would then realise who the victim was, and so the victim's anonymity would go as well. So I think it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one.
Well, Emily, we've covered a lot of ground over the last 50 minutes. Thank you so much for taking so many calls. It's been an absolute pleasure. We will see you again soon, I hope. That's Emily Thornberry, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary. It's 5:49. Let's get the latest news headlines from Thomas Watts.
The Shadow Foreign Secretary's told Ian Labour would join a new customs union after Brexit and jointly negotiate